Many riders struggle with riding a heavy motorcycle, especially at slow speeds or in tight turns. This is complicated even more if they're not an experienced rider. While my recommendation is always to start with a manageable motorcycle in its size, weight, and power, many riders find themselves on a big, heavy motorcycle as their first ride. This week we'll look at some tips to help you handle a bigger motorcycle. Hey, my name's Kevin and I release a weekly video here on MCrider focused on road skills or road strategy to help you become a better rider. Become a member of MCrider at mcrider.com/support and you'll get access to even more tools to help you stay sharp and develop your skills on two wheels. Now, before we get into tips on handling a heavy motorcycle, let's talk briefly about why riding a larger motorcycle is more difficult than a smaller bike. Well, it all comes down to the physical size of the machine, which affects the weight, and larger motorcycles typically have more power than smaller motorcycles. This is one of the reasons why you'll see all new rider courses with smaller CC motorcycles on the training range. Putting an 800-pound cruiser or a 200-horsepower sport bike in the hands of brand new riders out on a training range would be the recipe for disaster. But that's the exact position that many riders put themselves in when they purchase their first motorcycle. They buy their dream bike, or they're talked into buying a larger bike than they need by their friends who ride or an overeager salesman. Another important factor to consider is that bigger motorcycles tend to be more expensive, so dropping the motorcycle becomes a bigger fear for the rider as well. Nobody wants to see their expensive touring bike laying over on its side at a stop sign. It hurts the pride and the wallet every time that happens. So my advice is always to purchase a smaller motorcycle and then after a year or two look for something a little bigger. If you do this, you'll be safer. Trust me, you'll learn to ride quicker as well. And for most people, it will save you money in the long run than starting out on a big, heavy, expensive cruiser or a lightning fast sport bike. So let's look at weight and how that affects the new rider. Well, new riders tend to make a lot of small mistakes in their riding a motorcycle that are more pronounced the heavier the motorcycle is. If I pull up to a stop sign on a Honda Grom and I'm slightly out of balance at that stop, it's not really that big of a deal. At a stop, I can have a significant amount of lean angle on a smaller bike like a Grom and still be able to get that motorcycle upright because of the light weight of the motorcycle. But if I made that same mistake on my Honda Goldwing behind me or a Harley Street Glide, I'll be picking that bike up off the ground because once it leans so far, all you can do at that point is get out of the way because it's going over for a nap. So the margin of error is much smaller on a larger, more powerful motorcycle, and this not only applies to the weight of the motorcycle, but the brakes and especially the throttle of a more powerful machine as well. New riders often lack the braking finesse or the throttle control required to ride a small motorcycle smoothly, and this problem is much worse depending on the power characteristics of the motorcycle once they get on a bigger machine. So there's a world of difference between riding a Honda Rebel, a good starting motorcycle option, and riding a Harley-Davidson Road Glide or other heavy cruiser, especially if you're not proficient with the techniques of riding a motorcycle. So technique is huge. You're going to hear me saying that a lot from here on out. Technique is one of those things that you can carry with you from the smallest motorcycle to the largest, most powerful motorcycle on the road, and it always applies. The technique for making an emergency stop on a small motorcycle is exactly the same on a larger bike. The technique for making a U-turn on that small MSF range bike is exactly the same as the technique on my Fat Bob behind me. The difference is that smaller motorcycles will allow for sloppier technique than a larger motorcycle will. So let's face it, we all have sloppy technique when we're learning a new skill. So if you're having trouble handling your heavy motorcycle, you don't have a motorcycle problem, you have a technique problem. But remember, technique will always be learned quicker and with less potential repercussions on a smaller motorcycle. It's going to be easier to pick up because that smaller bike is more forgiving. When I was teaching new rider classes, I would have riders who could perform the U-turn with no problem within the designated box on a small training bike, but I would often correct their technique. They were performing it within the guidelines of the exercise, but their technique needed work. The reason for this is that I know if they tried that same U-turn with the same technique on a larger motorcycle, they wouldn't be successful. The smaller motorcycle will allow you to make mistakes that a bigger motorcycle will penalize you for. So what kind of things can you work on to develop your technique? I put together a training resource with a lot of videos at mcrider.com/hb, and you can use that to increase your technique, whether you're riding a small starter motorcycle or riding a big heavy motorcycle. This page includes this video and a lot of other resources that focus on the techniques for developing slow speed control that's critical for riding a large, heavy motorcycle. Slow speed stuff carries less risk with it, and it helps you develop those techniques for riding the motorcycle at higher speeds. So the first technique that you'll want to develop, and you can find it on this page at mcrider.com/hb, is coming to a stop and being in complete control at that stop. This is probably one of the biggest areas where heavier bikes are dropped the most often, and it's usually attributed to bad technique. The primary things to focus on are the techniques you're focusing on, or keeping the handlebars straight at the stop, head and eyes up, and I like to finish the stop using just the rear brake. So if I finish the last few feet of the stop with that rear brake, my left foot goes down first, and rarely does my right foot ever go to the ground when I'm out riding. You know, occasionally if the road's off camber or the wind's blowing or I happen to make a little bit of an unbalanced stop, that right foot will go down. But most of the time the bike's in such control that just my left foot goes down. So if a heavier motorcycle is just a little bit out of balance at that stop, it'll fall over to its side. But by using that rear brake to finish the stop, the motorcycle will be much more balanced. And you can see me demonstrate that on the video found at mcrider.com/hb. So once you've developed a proper stopping technique and you've worked on that technique, you can move on to another exercise that you'll find there, and that will help you practice that skill over and over until it becomes proficient and becomes your riding habit. This exercise is called the stop and go, and this exercise will help you develop the muscle memory so that every stop is performed with the correct technique. Remember, our goal is not just stopping the motorcycle. Our goal is to focus on the correct technique. In the earlier exercise, you developed that technique or you started working on it. Now you're repeating it over and over in the stop and go to make it your riding habit. Another area where riders struggle with larger motorcycles is turning from a stop. So they pull up to a stop sign, they've got the bike to a stop, and they have a difficult time making that left or right turn within their lane, so without running into the opposing lane or running off the road making that turn. I've got a video focused on the proper technique for turning from a stop. Again, you can find that on this page. The techniques you'll want to develop in order to turn from a stop are looking where you want the motorcycle to go. You want to turn the handlebars before you begin the turn. So I'm at the stop sign. If it's a tight turn, I'm going to turn my head and eyes to the left, and I'm going to turn those handlebars to the left before the motorcycle ever starts moving. And you'll be using the friction zone to smoothly get power to the rear wheel. And notice I keep mentioning technique. I told you that I would. That's the difference between being able to ride a smaller motorcycle and a larger motorcycle. If you develop good technique, it'll carry with you to every motorcycle you ever throw a leg over, whether it's big or small. So head over to mcrider.com/hb, look at the techniques and the videos that I've included there, and I've got a bonus video and a skill that you can work on that a lot of people struggle with on a larger motorcycle. Again, focus on that technique, and you'll be doing it on no time, no matter what motorcycle you're on. Also, consider becoming a member at mcrider.com/support. You'll get access to the forums for direct feedback on these and other techniques and everything motorcycle related. And you can develop these skills and more with several training exercises in the field guide and that's all included with your membership. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MC Rider. Ride safe, and we'll see you on the road.